Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, as the case might be. Welcome or welcome back. Again, as the case might be. My name is Dalibor Petrovic. I'm a partner. And over the last couple of years, I've had a distinct pleasure to be hosting this series of live webcasts that we've been bringing regularly to you, our audiences. These webcasts, as many of you know, we are using to highlight Canadian tech leaders to bring their personal stories and professional stories to you. But we are also using this channel to share the latest of our thinking and our research. And today is one of those sessions where we are going to be unpacking Deloitte's Tech Trends 2023. This is number 4 of 6 deep dive webcasts where we are going to be exploring a particular tech trend. In this case, a tech trend referred to as flexibility, the best ability. The session is going to be about 1 hour long, and because this is a live presentation, we of course welcome your involvement, your questions. So please feel free to submit any questions you might have using the Q&A feature of this platform. So we are now 2 minutes into it. I would just like to warmly welcome an esteemed panel that is going to engage in this important conversation with us. I'm very thrilled to be welcoming Khalid Kark. Khalid is a managing director at Deloitte and leads all of Deloitte global tech research. And Khalid is going to be sort of sharing his perspectives on this particular trend that is very close to his heart, because of course he was very deeply personally involved in this particular research. Joining me and Khalid is Stephen Harrington. Stephen Harrington is a partner of Deloitte Canada and leads our future of work practice. So all matters relating to the future of work. Given that this session is clearly related to the future of work, specifically tech talent, Stephen's perspectives will be very, very valuable. And last, but certainly not least, my dear friend and a gentleman who holds the coolest title amongst all of Deloitte globally is Mike Bechtel, our global chief futurist. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. What we will do first is we're going to provide you all with a little bit of a refresher and a context around tech trends. And then we're going to delve deeper into the tech trend number 4 and stimulate the conversation, which I know will be excellent. So with that, perhaps, Mike, first over to you to walk us through the tech trends context. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Dalibor. You are the host with the most, and it continues to be a privilege to beam into the virtual Great White North every other week with you over this series. And, you know, it says a lot about the quality of a series when you're in the literal middle and you're just as excited as you were on the first one or the last one. And so, folks, as Dalibor said, as the case may be, welcome or welcome back. And let's get cooking. Let's talk tech trends, and let's talk specifically about our tech talent trend this year. So as a matter of baseline, I do this a little more quickly each time with the presumption, as errant as that may be, that most of you are at this point exposed to or familiar with our tech trends research and rubric. But the idea really, folks, is this. We've been at this for about 15 years. Okay, 14 for those of you in the accounting profession. And we say that not as a boast, right? Not as a proof of work or a trust us, we're professionals statement, but as a recognition that when you're up to your ears in all things newfangled for long enough, you start to see trends within the trends, right? You start to see patterns that bring signal to the noise and extract meaning from some of the chaos. And, you know, the wrong way to think about technology and specifically technology trends or emergent technology trends, is as an unrelated blizzard of buzzwords, right? We could waste a lot of time together debating endlessly about, like, is it a metaverse or is it more of an unlimited reality, a digital reality, perhaps an omniverse? The right way to think about technology emergence is to recognize that the things that tend to matter are evolutions along known trajectories, not semi-random, first of their kind, right, buzzwords. And so through that lens, right, we can say, wait a minute, perhaps, right, metaverse, digital reality, unlimited reality, call it what you want, but perhaps that's simply what's next in human-computer interaction. Why? Because everything we've ever seen suggests human-computer interaction gets simpler. Maybe information systems and the move towards ML, AI, generative AI, right? Maybe that's not some shocking first of its kind something. Maybe that's just what's next in our management of information and insights. Why? Because computers have only ever gotten smarter, right? And as we emulate more and more subsets of what we typically regard as human intelligence, it stands to reason, right, that AI is what's next. And then finally, computation, right? The idea that we had a 50-year run of things getting better, faster, cheaper, smaller. Moore's law. Not a day goes by in a profession like mine where you're not invoking good old Moore's law. But the last 10 years have been less about miniaturization, more about virtualization, right? Don't throw a smaller computer at the problem, throw more of them at the problem, AKA the cloud, right? And today, right, moving from hub and spoke to spoke, right? This idea of decentralization, of Web3, of in us we trust. Well, folks, if that's all you had to work with and you were, a guy and a gal in a garage starting a startup, that's all you'd need to really worry about, right? Let's get a more elegant experience, delivered with more intelligence and insight, and powered by world-class horsepower. Great. But if we're being honest with ourselves, right, most of us are not a guy and a gal in a garage, right? We're both leaders, but also stewards of established, successful organizations. And so today, right, today's trend, we're going to start talking about these guardian or grounding 3 trends, right? Specifically a trend on the business of technology, AKA the recognition that in pursuit of all that blue sky stuff I just went on about, we need to make sure that we're protecting the successes we already have, right? We say feet firmly on the ground, right? As a colleague of mine said, Dalibor, the adulting that comes with pioneering, the responsibility, right, that comes with provocation. And so the trend we're going to hit today, the business of technology trend that we saw in our conversations with clients this year in close partnership with our tech leadership global research director, Khalid Kark, here on the phone, is this idea called flexibility, the best ability. Okay, what is that other than a clever rhyme? Let's get into it. I'm going to provide a quick survey of the trend, but then mercifully, I'll get out of our collective hair and we'll have a conversation, right? Not a evangelization on this topic and more with Khalid and Stephen. So here's the scoop. First things first, what is this H.R. Geiger organic tree situation? Well, folks, this is generative AI in action. We use Gen AI this year to paint all the artwork in this year's tech trends. And the prompt, right? The prompt we used, which I just think is sort of goosebumping, was we said, like, give us a picture of multiple organic career paths connoting flexibility and abundance. And the robot brain came back with this, and I'm personally impressed because I think it captures a fundamental piece of this trend. And the trend is we interviewed, as part of this global technology leadership study, hundreds, nearly 1,000, I think. And Khalid, I don't know if you're on hot mic right now, but how big was the N in this particular series of questions and discussions?
About 1,300.
Wow.
1,300. Okay, cool. Cool. For once, I'm not on the hyperbolic side. That's good. Thank you, sir. 1,300 tech leaders. We said, what's great? What's not so great? Where are you stuck? And one of the overwhelming themes that popped up was that tech leaders are sick and tired of the quote unquote war for talent.
Mm-hmm.
That this race for the mythical full stack engineer, this treasure hunt for the mythical rock star developer, 10x developer, it's problematic for a couple reasons. One, these people don't necessarily exist all that much in the wild. But two, and this is very interesting, by the time you find these deep specialist technical superheroes, you've spent a good 12, 18 months finding and signing this individual. We marry that up with another finding in our study, that the typical half-life of emerging technology is down to about 2.5 years.
Wow.
And so you look at it from the macro. You say 2 years to find my superhero, then you pay her a queen's ransom, and then she's only got about 6 to 12 months to flex those skills, strut that stuff, before you need a new superhero. And that's not great business, right? So there's this old 1980s movie called War Games. I'm going to totally date myself, right? Matthew Broderick before Ferris Bueller. But it's this story about global thermonuclear war, and there's this supercomputer called Whopper and another one called Joshua. Again, geeky stuff. But this computer models all the scenarios of thermonuclear war and comes up with this goosebumpy revelation. He says, I've determined the only way to win is not to play. Mm-hmm. Well, certainly that checks out for mutually assured destruction and global war. But maybe it turns out to make sense in the quote unquote world of competing for talent. Maybe the way to win isn't to compete, but to create. Mm. And so what we started to find was that the way of getting out of what we've called this zero-sum blues, this musical chairs game where there's, 8 needs and 7 people, is organizations saying enough is enough. We are going to do it differently. Mercedes-Benz, for example, we spoke with Mercedes. Now they are both an auto company and European. I think everybody knows both facts, right? But at the intersection of that Venn diagram means they are the most regulated entity imaginable, right? Auto unions and Europe. And what they said was, you know what? We are going to change our hiring profile. We're going to change from hiring for specific expertise, AKA their version of rockstar developers, right? We're going to move away from that and move towards a world where we're going to hire for curiosity, aptitude, and attitude, AKA, horsepower, learning disposition, and get along factor. Hmm. And here's the interesting part. In the job descriptions, they say, you're going to be doing ABC role for 3 to 4 years, after which you will be plucked out of that role, shake off those expectations, get trained up in a new role, and work on that for 3 to 4 years. And here's the aha. And Dalibor, you and I have jammed on this, and I know that this has been sort of a big realization for both of us, right? That it used to be you had to choose between the deep specialist and the shallow generalist, right? Which was code for not so deep. Like smart generalist always feels like faint praise, right? Well, they're smart. What they're creating is a third way. Yep. A serial specialist. And let that sink in, right? It's still specialization. It's still depth and impact. It's just that you're doing it on different topics every 3 to 5 years. And the reason that's so big, and this connects to this title of flexibility, the best ability. This is what talent in part wants, right? When you talk with talent at any age, but particularly, millennials and Gen Z, they say, what do you want? Variety, but I want to make an impact, right? This is the have your cake and eat it too. This is macro variety with micro impact. And so Virginia Department of Health similarly saying, listen, if we foisted AI ML on our people and told them, yikes, robots coming for jobs, right, that would end poorly. But by reconceiving it as a change management program and saying, hey, we are going to free a lot of you folks from the muck and drudgery of your currently repetitive roles so that you can take on better tasks and classier problems we're solving. You start to see, oh, good news, my job is changing. Not, oh no, my job is changing.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, back to that War Games reference, those who remember it, love it. Those who don't, like, oh, here's the 80s stuff again. But the point is, by choosing not to play, choosing not to compete, but rather create, you open the floodgates on sourcing, right? Who do you hire? Where do you hire from? Curious, smart, aptitude people everywhere, right? You can create those flexible career paths that everybody's pining for as a feature, not a bug. And then on the skills front, right, you're able to basically say, we keep our people up to date by design. And so enough of me. Khalid, Stephen, my intuition is that this is just one facet of the, gajillion things, pardon me, as I try to work that out, of the billion ways that technology talent is changing in the future, and in the way that the future of work is shaping technology and vice versa. I'd love to hear from both of you. What are the other 90% of the tale? And I'm here to learn.
Yeah, and I'll start, and Stephen, feel free to jump in. So thanks, Mike. This was great. I heard you do this many times, and it's always just fascinating what you pull in and how you pull in kind of the context and the reference. So appreciate it. So let's zoom back out a little bit. Mike talked a little bit about kind of the talent and the specifically tech talent. And of course, as he mentioned, this is part of a bigger study that we're doing on global tech leaders and where that role is going and so on. And one of the things that we've encountered in having those interactions with 1,300 global leaders is that the role of tech and tech talent isn't for tech only. It's actually an enterprise role. And in that context, what I say is stop worrying about tech talent specifically, but think about what is your contribution in the broader future of work. And I'd like to kind of put 3 main rocks, and we can go through each one for the future of work. The first is really the work, the actual work that the whole enterprise, the whole organization does has changed because of technology, because of automation, because of all these other factors. And therefore, the roles that we build, the roles that we think about, the roles that we create as part of our organization needs to be thoughtfully thought through differently. And I know, Stephen, you have some thoughts on it, and we'll get to that. Let me just go through the 3 buckets. The second bucket is the actual workforce. And Mike alluded to this a little bit, and that is really the skills. The actual skills are changing very, very rapidly. It used to be that it was easy. You hired for a deep technologist, and that was the end of it. The 3 top skills that tech leaders are hiring for today are cognitive flexibility, emotional intelligence, and creativity and thinking outside the box. And the reason that they say that they're hiring for these skills is that the fact that it's a lot easier to hire for these skills and train people on tech than vice versa, than getting a deep technologist and getting them engaged on emotional intelligence. A lot harder journey to make, right? So the human skills are equally, if not more important than the technical skills as you kind of think about your role broadening into the enterprise and to think about the interaction and the collaboration that you need and so on. And then the last is the workplace. And of course, we've all known the notion of working from home or hybrid. What we saw in our data was really fascinating. What we saw was that the chief technology officer or the CIO or whoever the tech lead was much more bullish on hybrid work as the future way of doing things. And when we asked the same question of business leaders and CEOs, the percentages were 10, 15, sometimes 20% different, even within the same organization. And so this notion of tech leaders saying, you know what, by the way, number one reason you're able to retain talent for tech leaders is flexible work environment, right? Not compensation, not anything else, flexible work environment. Number two was mission and vision. We'll get to that in a second. But the point being, that is the number one reason they're able to retain talent, and the CEOs are pushing people to come back to work. That's creating a little bit of a tension in the future of work for organizations, the enterprises, and specifically technology. So let's maybe just kind of zoom back out and think about these three buckets, because to me, those are the contexts for tech talent that are going to enable you to think about tech talent in a much broader way. So let's start maybe with the actual work. And Stephen, I know you have a perspective on it. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, thank you, Khalid. And of course, I mean, to your point, that workforce, workplace framework is so useful on a couple of levels. One of them is, here's the trick, you got to think about all three at the same time.
Yeah.
That's the really hard part, because we've tended to break that question up across our enterprise. We give one of those questions to IT, one to HR, one to real estate, and that's not working that well. How do we, to the point you made, tackle these things as an enterprise? When it comes to work, I think it's really helpful to time travel with me for a minute, if you will. It's amazing how quickly we move on when something absolutely game-changing happens. It's just human. But like, let's go back to 2020 and imagine that you're a data conversion worker in an IT shop. You're an independent contributor. You spend your day pulling data out of a system. Maybe you transform it a little bit and you put it back again. And you do that over and over again. In 2019, you would have had a battle rhythm to work that kept you in that job. You would have commuted every day. There would have been something to that. You know, pick up your coffee and your breakfast in the morning. You have friends at work and breaks where you interact with them. That habit, that rhythm of work kept people in those sorts of jobs in really important ways. You know, fast forward, let's say you're a single white female living in downtown Toronto, and that's your job. You fast forward to the pandemic, and what happened? Well, first of all, you were told to go do your data conversion work from home, and don't worry, it'll only be 2 weeks. Maybe we've forgotten that. It was a little longer. Now, the question is, how long would you do that job on the corner of your kitchen table by yourself every day before you asked yourselves, why am I doing this? What is work to me? And that's what happened at scale in the employment market. There was an existential crisis, and I'll put up my hand. I went through it. I think we all went through it. What I'm getting to is the obvious thing floating on the surface of the post-pandemic world is people want to work from home. We spend a lot of time talking about that. But there were other fundamental changes that I know Mike would tell us, like a lot of trends, were already happening before the pandemic and got accelerated, and they're under the surface. And one of those things is preference has changed, I think, forever. A lot of people want different things from work, and as employers, we're trying to figure out how to give everybody what they want, even though those preferences are diverging. But out of that hot mess, I think one thing's absolutely true, is that another trend that was accelerated is that people are acting a lot more like consumers than ever before when it comes to the work itself. And by that, I mean, they have the shopping cart of interest that's gotten way broader. I'll say something that reasonable adults can disagree with. So if you do, put it in the chat and give me heck. But I think that baby boomers and Gen Xers Gen X being the greatest generation of all time. When we entered the workforce, our thought was, we're just lucky to have a job. And for millennials and Gen Zs, it's more, you're lucky to have me. That's a very big mindset shift in the employment market for us to think about. And by the way, I'm with the millennials and Gen Zs. I think that's a healthier attitude. The shopping cart that everybody's looking for, because by the way, boomers and Xers, we're really good at bandwagon jumping. This sounds good. Let's get on this. And that shopping cart isn't just pay. To Khaled's point earlier, it's flexibility. And we'll get, I think, later into what we mean by that. It's not just working from home. They want skills. They want career paths. They want purpose and impact. More than anything, in IT in particular, they want to do cool work. So if you're following my analogy and you agree that employees are acting more like consumers, the punchline is, when's the last time we stopped and looked at the work itself, the job, and asked ourselves, would anybody want to buy this thing?
This is such a brilliant insight, Stephen. And that's actually I don't think many employers are actually asking that. Are we creating a product that our target consumer is going to buy? The product being the work, consumer being the employee. That is, and if you think of it from that perspective, you're absolutely right. There are critical elements, just like in any product you want to buy or a service you want to consume, that increase the value. And how you pay as an employee, you pay through your work, you pay through your effort, your time, your energy. That's your currency, and job is the product. This is phenomenal. I'm very, very, very
well. And for the IT leaders, the second punchline is, guess what, guys? We got to figure this out for our IT shop. But then we also need to find the capacity to help the rest of the organization figure it out, because these redesigned jobs, they're not going to happen without technology. In particular, the cheap and cheerful, the things that can automate tasks or take tasks away in a thoughtful, design thinking approach to creating future jobs.
Well, I mean, I think just a statistic here, 14% of tech leaders are saying they're either leading or co-leading the future of work effort within their enterprise. Another 33% are saying that they are active contributors to shaping that strategy on behalf of the enterprise. So again, I think what you're saying, Stephen, is absolutely on point, that there's a huge number of tech leaders that are actively involved in shaping that future of work through again, the capabilities that they bring, whether that's automation, whether that's rethinking the way, but the job description is a really interesting one, or the job roles. We have this notion of a job canvas, and goes to Mike's point earlier, this notion of you hire for not a particular job, but a family of jobs. And your role could flex depending on the need, the capability, what you're doing as part of it, and it changes, evolves over time. And this notion of not having a singular role and having very complex but non-flexible career paths is obsolete now. I mean, I think the number 3 reason for retaining the high performers is the ability, the independence, and the ability to chart their own career paths. So we tend to get bogged down with, hey, here's kind of the career path that we think for this particular role. Think outside of that notion of individual careers and career paths to give more flexibility. To your point, if you think of it as a product, think about how you're going to package that product and make it attractive for multiple roles that could exist within the context of a family.
Yeah, maybe, Khalid, we could turn to, that was work. No problem, guys. We got work handled. That was easy. Maybe we talk about workforce next, and there's a bit of an unfair thing, team, I like to say this and I'll say it again, that we've reached the point with skills where we keep asking people to do things at scale that they literally don't know how to do. And it's one of the reasons I'd suggest that our strategies and our operational plans tend to fall short every year, is because there's this drag on the organization of people having to work that little bit harder, or maybe aimlessly, or without success because they don't know how. And there's a couple of things that we're seeing organizations experiment with to try and get beyond this, and they're both pretty revolutionary ideas, I think, although simple shifts. One of them is, when it comes to workforce planning in IT, let's stop. It's the same sort of thing. Let's talk less about jobs, and let's instead focus on skills analytics. And I've got a simple pattern I've been using with clients. It doesn't require you to buy a new massive competency model, make it digital, do tons of assessments. It's actually just sitting down with the business and the sub-departments of IT, and saying to your leaders in those areas, what are you trying to achieve as a business in the next 5 years? What is your strategy? Because strategy is the most stable future predictor for where an IT department's going to go. It's literally what you're trying to achieve. So you're going to try to go there. We know that. What's nice about that as an anchor is you can then say, okay, well, if that's where you're trying to go, what skills do you need that you're missing altogether, or you don't have enough of, to make that strategy come true? And you'll end up with your own bespoke set of skills. They might be badly defined. HR professionals might lose their minds because they're like, oh, that's not a skill. It doesn't matter. What you want is, you want the raw intelligence of the business and those gaps. Tie those skills to roles and figure out how you're going to build, buy, borrow, and bot those skills in a really detailed plan, and carry it through. I really think that's the future workforce planning. And the second cool idea is rapid reskilling. And I'm sure you guys have more to say about that, but here's the premise is, what we tend to do, even if we've had somebody really bright who'd been working in project management in IT, they might come to us and say, I'd like to get into cyber. Our reflex response would be, well, there's a great 3-year program at college over here, and there's a great 5-year program at the university over there. Take your pick. But this is reskilling, so that's actually kind of a weird response, because what we just said to them is, go learn 100% of the cyber domain, because either of those programs are going to do that. And then come back to me when you're done and beg me for a job where I'm going to allow you to use 5% of what you just learned. Why don't we just hack that and go directly to the 5%? Let's teach you just what you need to know to work in the security operations center day one. And the rest of it will cover through apprenticeship. That's what I mean when I say rapid reskilling. And it's about democratizing opportunity through IT and getting people there faster.
Right.
This is like, the title of this trend is Flexibility, the Best Ability. What I'm sensing is, it's not flexibility just with the person who we're looking for a talent who themselves are flexible, but it's also creating flexibility embedded in the definition of work, flexibility in the definition of workforce. And I'm going to assume where you're going to go next is a flexibility in the workplace too. So it truly is a capital F flexibility. That seems to be the word for this topic.
Yeah. The chapter title, the new F word, didn't make it past risk. But that's it. Stephen, something that you were talking about, we've unlocked the emoji, by the way. Good job, folks. But Stephen, something you were saying as we were connecting before this session was, for example, right? Like, work from home, like that's about this interesting. Work from anywhere, like, now you're talking. And I think, to Dalibor's point, like, that's flexibility thinking, right? It's not about old orthodoxy, new orthodoxy. It's about down with orthodoxy. And I was wondering, like, if you had more, or Khalid, you had more on
yeah, I'll
in the vein of what Dalibor's saying, like flexibility on the part of the employer.
Yeah, I'll share one very quick example. I was doing kind of a similar talk to a client of ours, small city in the US. The workforce that they had, tech workforce that they had, was very, very specific to that city. And of course, they had hiring problems because it's a fairly global company, and the workforce that they relied on came from that one city. So of course, they invested heavily in the university there, and they were very actively involved, et cetera. but it was a small city, and they were constrained by the type of people that they could get for their tech function. And as soon as the pandemic hit, the CIO goes, you know what, an epiphany came to me that my talent can be anywhere from Sao Paulo to Singapore. I don't really care where they come from as long as they're able to do the work. And what that did was completely change the paradigm. So he worked on building a team, a global team that spread actually literally from South America to Asia. And he kept working on it, and he created this. And then they had a meeting with the CFO, and there was a Zoom call with 28 people from 6 different continents. And the CFO was just blown away by the fact that it's like, where are you from again? Yeah, because they were such a small company focused on their particular city to hire. And after that call, the CFO goes to the CIO and goes, you know what? I think you should lead this effort on behalf of the whole enterprise to be able to really broaden our thinking about talent and where we can get it. And what that has done is not just the fact that it's given the best talent to that company, it's actually given them engaged talent that's very much aligned to the skill set that they were looking for. And they just broadened the aperture to the whole globe, right? And so it's actually a win-win for the employer and the employee in terms of kind of gaining that perspective in a much broader way.
Yeah, and if I'll just quickly add, like, and I think what Khalid was just saying leads to some advice to your point, Mike, to redefine what we mean by flexibility. One of the chief ways to do that is to not start with the question, should our people work from home, or, gee, I guess they have to, and how are we going to make that work? And instead start with the question, what are we trying to achieve as an IT department? And how could people working from anywhere help us achieve that? Answer that question first. And then recognize that flexibility isn't just where, it's also when and how. We already talked a lot about how we could change the how, but the when matters too. You probably have people in your organization that have to be on site, but if you can be flexible about when, that's going to count too. Underneath the flexibility topic is a human need for autonomy and trust. And that's why once we've given it to people, it's so hard to take away again. Nobody wants to lose autonomy and trust. So thinking about when, where, and how, instead of just the one question, I think will unlock a lot for you too.
Yeah. You know, Stephen, I had a client years ago who shall remain nameless to protect the guilty. He was a friend. I mean, he's a friend. We were tight, you know, and he said, you know, your bill rate is a bit aggressive, but I know that I'm getting more than just you, right? I'm getting the team. I'm getting the knowledge base of your firm, different firm at the time. But then this is the part that stuck with me. He said, I'm also getting the pound of flesh. And I said, excuse me? And he said, well, as a consultant, you're here before us, you leave after us, you're forever stressed. There's the sort of the blood, sweat, and tears factor. And that stuck with me for years. And one of the things I recognized during the pandemic was that get ready for a mouthful here, but I think it's the right mouthful, that ritualistic martyrdom, that theater of pain, we realized we didn't need it. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, and some of the questions in chat here are asking, like, how's it going to go for these people that are forcing X, Y, and Z on people again? I'm like, I don't think it's going to go well, because I don't know that you can put that genie back in that bottle when we've shown that you don't need the theatrics of martyrdom. One man's opinion, right? But I don't know. You stirred something in me with your remarks, Stephen.
Mike, I'm going to steal absolutely both of those terms. So just so you know, it's fair play if I call it out. And I agree with you. I do think some of those structured return to works are happening for different reasons. In some cases, there's a logic behind them. But I agree. I don't know if it's stable, and I definitely suspect it of not being strategic.
Yeah. Dalibor, there's good questions in chat.
There are, yes. I was going to
facilitate in your inimitable way.
I certainly shall. So there is one very, very interesting and a punchy question here that says, well, if you are suggesting that there is a half-life of skills that is only 2.5 years, and that we should be thinking of, attracting people who are flexible, creative, with high emotional intelligence, willingness to learn, where does in that equation, where does the value of 20 years of experience factor in? Like, why would I then proceed to want to have, gray hairs, or in my case, no hairs, if I could get, somebody who is fresh out of school, capable, innovative, creative, but also dramatically less expensive, perhaps? Where does the experience factor into this?
I'm really excited.
If it still does.
I'm very excited for my esteemed expert colleagues to go first.
Well, I will tell you from my perspective, we're doing a lot of recruiting redesign these days. That's another hot topic. Workforce analytics is big. That's big because, of course, a lot of organizations are having trouble finding the talent they need. This is the really hard thing to do, but I think it's in the right answer territory. And I'll start by telling the story of a mistake a client made. A client of ours found a really good psychometric assessment scaled option. It was a technology plugged right into their recruiting system. And they were doing exactly what Khalid talked about earlier. They were saying, I want empathy, I want drive, I want conceptual thinking. If I can get that in greater volumes, I know that those people are going to learn faster. The problem is it became the new black and white answer for the recruiting and hiring teams.
Okay.
So you fundamentally had to have those factors or you weren't being considered. And to the point of the question being asked, other factors that are important just got thrown out. And as a result, the talent pipeline shrank because fewer and fewer people, as opposed to being inclusive, were getting through. This is the tough part. What we actually want to do is build a recruiting funnel that asks questions about psychology, asks questions about experience, looks at behaviors, looks at whether or not this is the right place for this individual, given a bunch of factors, in a hiring team that's able to look at multiple factors and make a judgment, which we're, I think, increasingly afraid to do these days in business, but there's no other way to get a human who's really going to fit your business. And I hope that makes sense, team. I think that's the really hard part.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, again, as Dalibor said, as Mike said, we've all been saying, I think the notion is there is no black and white, there is no single silver bullet. I think it depends on the role, it depends on kind of what the objectives are. But in general, I think you're much more likely to benefit from employees who are flexible. There may be roles that may require, and still do, kind of very deep expertise in a particular topic and area, software or systems that are obsolete now, and you kind of need that institutional knowledge, but you got to balance that out with the ability to, again, it's not a black and white answer, but I think there's much more of our employee base today that's stuck in that view than there needs to be. I asked this question of tech leaders: what percentage of your workforce is going to be relevant based on their current skill set in the next 2 to 3 years? And the answer was 67%, right? On average, right? Which means a third of the current tech workforce in some way, shape, or form needs to adjust their skill set in order to figure out where they fit in the future of where the enterprise is going. To me, that's a really significant number. And of course, it's more exacerbated in technology than it is in other areas. But I think that trend holds true in virtually every part of your organization. And what are you doing? And are you thinking about that employee base to enable them to actually succeed going forward is your role as a leader.
And I think there's a frame too that's broader than this question that, Mike, you'll appreciate as a futurist. And it's all about, where is safety? Humans like safety. We were wired, evolutionarily speaking, to think that way. And we've, especially in the last century, felt that safety is in deep specialization. Safety is that I'm gonna learn how to do something, and I'm gonna do it over and over again better than anyone else. But a futurist will tell you the evidence shows that's not the way to think about what's happening today. In fact, safety is in your next skill. It's in your next role. It's in leaving tasks behind, not sticking to them. So if we can just start to try to get people to recognize where safety actually is, it's going to be better for our organization.
Stephen, this is the gold nugget number 4 for me on this call. And this is so powerful. And this is so, actually, when you think about it, so painful, obvious, but when you don't think about it, it's counterintuitive. People cling to things that are actually fleeting.
Yes.
And the world is moving, baby, you like it or not. This is extremely powerful message. I'll actually take that message to my kids right after this call. Safety is in your future skill. This is really good. This is really good. A couple of more questions I wanted to ask. You talked about, need for flexible talent, people who are, it's easier, it's a better strategy to find people who are open to learn, flexible, empathetic, and so forth, and teach them soft skills. Question is around, how do you ensure that upfront screening for jobs that are technical jobs in IT, in technology, that upfront screening does a better job for those hidden gems not to be dropped before they not to be dropped too soon?
Yeah, it's a nuanced topic, and done poorly, it can be fraught and deeply problematic, and create all of the wrong outcomes that we seek in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, to be honest. But Stephen, I think you made an important but subtle point that, like, nonetheless, we must just be we must be decisive and selective without being discriminating in the wrong sense of the word, which is all to say, as a techie, I've had the opportunity to serve on the board at my alma mater for our business school for years, advisory board. And what I've lived through has been this pendulum swing towards deep specialization, right? 20 years ago, we would look each other in the eyes seriously and talk about learning how to learn, and a liberal arts education, and life of the mind, and reading the classics, and all these things. And 20 years on, like, let's call it 5 years ago, it was really specialization, training, job skills, utility. And that's all to say, I think part of it, to answer your question, Dalibor, or the great question from our guest, is pulling that screening funnel back towards first principles, saying, hey, we're not gonna just look at the computer scientists from these 4 schools. That's not going to be step 0. Step 0 is going to be, we're going to look at enthusiastic applicants wherever they may be. Mm-hmm. And then that's where you put in the decisiveness. How are you at these problem solving skills, right? Mm-hmm. How are you at these essay questions? How are you at X, Y, and Z? And again, one side might say that funnel's way too wide. Other people might say there's some inherent discrimination in grading an essay. But the fact of the matter is, if you're casting a wider net up front, I think you're going to do a better job of opening opportunities to more folks. That's my take.
There's a Stanford professor, Scott Hartley, who wrote this book, The Fuzzy and the Techie. The fuzzies are the arts and humanities majors at Stanford, and of course the techies. And the whole point of that conversation was to ensure that you have a balance. You can't survive and you can't win by just having the techie or the fuzzy. It's actually a combination, and making sure you've got that right balance and skill set becomes really important.
Yeah. This whole conversation is tickling my literature and philosophy undergrad. I'm beginning to feel like it was wise after all. Right. Dalibor, if I may, I just want to, before we run out of time for sure, make sure I say Happy International Women's Day to everybody. And in particular, I want to shout out to my great leader in workforce transformation here in Canada, Carolyn Hamer, and my great leader in the Government of Canada account, Shannon Lundquist. We're so lucky to have many of the leaders we have in the firm today.
Absolutely.
Right on, Stephen. Happy International Women's Day, everybody.
Indeed,
Everybody.
absolutely. I was actually going to mention that just last week we had a panel that consisted of 4 women who were talking about women in tech and particularly STEM education that starts early. And in the context of this fuzzies versus techies, an interesting observation was made that a way to attract more women specifically into the tech career is not only to focus on those who are in STEM, although we need more of those who are in STEM, but to also open up the aperture and said, look, you actually can and should consider tech career as a student if your passion is in humanities. Because going for even today, but obviously and going forward, it is those skills that will be essential for a successful tech career for all of us, of course, including women. So this was really a bang on message from last session.
Really good.
Another interesting question that we got from the audience is about isolation. People who increasingly feel isolated by working, I guess, not in proximity to their colleagues and team members physically. And the comment sort of carries on to talk about the discussion that the observation here was that the overall society is becoming less socialized and much more isolated, not only in a professional sense, but also personal sense. Do you have any reactions and reflections on that?
Yeah, we could do a whole talk on just that, couldn't we? I mean, I'll tell you my own sort of story over the last few years. I started studying the future of work back in 2011. And I did not predict the pandemic, I'll tell you that. But the other thing that the pandemic did is it shortened the window of what the future meant, didn't it, man? I used to get asked about 2030, 2035. Now it's next quarter, what is it going to look like? And you have to remember that early in the pandemic, the signals that we were seeing was surprisingly high numbers of people within a month saying that they loved working from home. But within 3 months, we also started to see a lot of data saying people felt overworked. 52% of the global population in late 2020 said they felt overworked, exhausted, lonely. And I thought, like a fool, okay, people thought at first this was great, but over time they're going to learn they don't like it. But here's the weird thing, the numbers stabilized. The latest data I saw is 80% of Canadians who worked from home during the pandemic want to continue to work from home the majority of the time, but they still feel overworked, exhausted, and lonely. And my aha about all of that was, oh, humans are capable of containing emotional paradox. And right. And as employers, both, what we have to accept, and this is harder to accept, is both things are true. People do want that flexibility, that autonomy and trust, and they're feeling overworked, exhausted, and lonely. And we have to think about how to create connections to both problems, not just one of them.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it also touches on...
And the answer is flexibility, right? That actually is the answer. So that people can ideally make choices regularly in a flexible, safe environment where sometimes they do want to go and be with their friends in the same office and do brainstorming. And tomorrow they might choose to do the work at their home or at Starbucks for all that matters, right?
But I think the pushback comes from when you mandate, right? Every Wednesday you got to be in the office, and that doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think it's the key word is flexibility. The one other thing that I was talking to a single mother who was kind of really glad that she was able to actually have the flexibility to work from home because she was able to do a lot more and able to progress a lot more in the workplace because of that, right? And so there's certain population kind of elements where it may make a lot more sense. For others, it may not. And so having that flexibility is really key. I think the other question, and again, I'm reading the question in the chat, how does it impact creativity? Silos don't help, right? And so there's no substitute to brainstorming in person in the office, et cetera. So how does that play into it? And again, I think the idea here is not forced brainstorming. It's actually random connections, often always drive innovation and so on. So how do you enable that in an environment where, if everybody's flexible, how do you kind of create those connections? Is really the question.
I don't know that the following will be the most value added contribution, but in the spirit of calling an audible, the discussion we've just had reminds me of this comic, which I quite love, that I'm sharing right here. Which
do I work at home or do I live at work?
Yeah,
very good.
That was peak.
That's very good.
Pandemic vibes, but I think I think the reason, you know, Khalid, your point about different. We use the phrase here in the American Midwest, right? Different strokes for different folks, and you know, the nature of my work is short, a great number of. Hopefully bright, but usually brief interactions with as many folks as I can engage with. And so that lends itself to a world of Zoom. And I actually joined a version of Deloitte, you know, right into the pandemic where like, wow, I get to meet with 600 clients a year, if not but for Zoom or Teams or what have you, that couldn't have been a something. And so, so I do think to Stephen's point and yours, Khalid, A, flexibility, we've hit that beat, but B, it really depends on the role. And as you said, Dalibor, so well, the strategy, what are you out to accomplish? Let's build the structures and work around that, not around big binary orthodoxies. Yeah.
The final question that we got from the all final on the list here, at least, is your thoughts on a 4-day work week. Stephen, do you want to kick us off? Any perspectives there?
Yeah, I'll do the really short version. I think a shortened work week is inevitable. The question, a lot like when tech comes out and you get the hype cycle, and you know what's going to happen, you just don't know when. That's how I feel about the 4-day work week. I actually was recently, finally, Mike, asked questions I hope you get asked all the time about the far-flung future, like instead of next quarter, what does it look like 10 years from now? And one of the things I did say is I think the biggest risk we face is that we're going to allow a future filled with meaningless jobs, because we treat people like robots and robots like robots, and we insist on 5-day work weeks, and people are regulated into driverless trucks because it creates jobs. That's the kind of future I'm worried about. 4-day work week is an idea to rationalize employment markets down to the diminishing tasks in the overall economy. I think it's a really fair idea for how to better distribute opportunity.
Yeah. And people actually do forget that the 5-day work week is comparatively recent invention.
Right.
Yeah,
that true. You know, up until very recently, there was no concept of the weekend, right? So I am very much with you on that, Stephen. Mike, Khalid, any closing thoughts? We are hitting the time.
Just adding one thing, and I guess I'm on a roll right now in books. So another book by an MIT professor, Superminds, and we kind of helped with this one, is it kind of shaping the future of work. Really talks about what Stephen is saying is the future actually, in my view, is going to be really great if we enable the automation, the robots, the AIs to support the work that we really love and enable the more mundane and the more kind of tactical things that we don't love to kind of support us in doing our best work. And so again, the flip side of that, the Superminds, is really a conversation around where does the future go if things play out exactly how we want it. And 4-day work week is definitely part of it. I think there was just a study recently that said 80% of the companies that move to a 4-day work week want to continue with a 4-day work week. So it's just, I think you're right, Stephen. I think it's inevitable. It's just about when.
Mike?
Folks, with maximum brevity, at least by my standards, check out a book by a social scientist called David Graeber. The name of the book involves a profanity, so I won't say it. but Google it, Bing it, whatever. It's a good exploration of that. And then also just, yeah, with my future head on, we used to think automation, AI, the rest of it would be a George Jetson future. Feet on the desk, press a button 2 hours a week and do not much. And then it went in the other direction, right? Working more than ever on everything. I think the real goal is success means having better problems to solve. And it's incumbent on us as leaders, right?
Yep.
Everybody's still on this call, right? Those better jobs won't make themselves.
Yeah.
And so as our folks are wondering, what am I going to do with the surplus of time? Maybe give them a 4-day week. And within those 4 days, make sure they're working on higher order tasks, better problems to solve, because if we don't help elevate, we're not doing our job.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all very much. Again, on this International Women's Day, happy 8th of March to all of our female colleagues, friends, mothers, daughters, and sisters. And we look forward to seeing you audience members again 2 weeks from now, when Michael and I are going to be unpacking our 5th tech trend, the tech trend curiously entitled "In Us We Trust." So this will be an interesting one. This is all going to be all about distributed trust and use cases for blockchain. So please join us, same channel 2 weeks from now. And for our panelists, Khalid, Stephen, Mike, as always, thank you so very much. And everyone, have a lovely Wednesday. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.